Well, let's get straight to the point. This is something we've been hearing a lot about lately. Do Indigenous people have a veto authority over provincial independence? I'll start right with the first point. No, they don't. Not in the slightest, not at all. Is there some sort of treaty right that gives them an ability to override a referendum held in a province? No, there isn't. Opponents to independence, supporters of the status quo, have been sort of bringing up this trope, this canard, that independence is impossible because Indigenous bands must give consent, and that's just absolutely untrue. Now, to be fair, Indigenous people are very, very important. They're citizens of the provinces like anybody else, and they should be participating and hopefully as supportive as humanly possible in any independence moves, and they should be respected. But do they have some sort of authority that stops it from happening? No. It's funny, when Quebec was holding its referendum, nobody really talked about that, did they? It's just that double standard when it comes to the West. Somehow people just start making up reasons, and they're being made up, and excuses and things as to why it can't happen. And they're pretty easily countered, but we got to counter them, so we do this video on it. Now, treaties. People always yell about treaty rights, but you know what? The vast majority of people who shout about treaty rights have never actually read one of the treaties. Go ahead, read them. They're all online. Treaty 7 covers southern Alberta. They're not very complicated documents. The treaties were signed. Again, we got to remember these agreements 150 years ago. And the vast majority of the treaties were defining the extents of what would become the reserves, from this river to this section of land and such for the different bands to live on. That was the bulk of the treaties. And hey, there was a lot of violations as governments took chunks of that land or didn't give land they were supposed to. These things happened, and that's where some of the settlements are still happening today. Consultation. Well, no, I'll get ahead of myself. That's into the Constitution, but I'll get on to that. So these treaties, though, because people say that the treaties won't let you go, it's a bunch of baloney. Now, the treaties were signed at that time, most of them with Queen Victoria. And then people say, you see, the only authority that can deal with this is the crown, this is royalty in England. And again, that's a load of bunk. It's garbage. And some people saying, too, a province can't become independent because it has all that crown land on it. And that means that they need consent of the king. No, they don't. We're not the Dominion of Canada any longer. We are a colony. Canada is a sovereign nation. We have the trappings of the old monarchy, but it's symbolic. We don't need, King Charles isn't going to come marching and galloping across with his army and wearing his armor and stopping a province from becoming independent. It's not a holdup. So when the crown, when you see it referred to in treaties, when you see it referred to in land, think of the modern definition of it, essentially, which is government. Government of the time. Right now, the government provincially is actually in charge of crown lands. When it's called crown, it's just an outdated name for government land. Government land is Albertan land, Saskatchewan land, BC land, publicly held land versus private land. The reserves are, by treaty, the land for the Indigenous descendants of those who signed those treaties. Absolutely, and it must be respected. Now, there'd be a violation of, I guess, if some province was talking about going independent, and then the day after they say they want to seize all the land from the people living on them on reserves and such. Yeah, that would be a treaty violation, but no citizen wants to do that. That's not even in the cards. Nobody's proposing that. And likewise, they're not going to come to your private household and steal your house because a province became independent. These are ridiculous meanderings down theoretical roads. So watch for this as you're promoting independence, as you're building that case. Careful when people just speak out of their butts and take you down rabbit holes that really have no legislative or constitutional basis, okay? And people saying as well, the treaties and the Constitution talked about traditional lands and other. Okay, some of the text, again, go on, read the treaty. Read the bottom of Treaty 7. So it's pretty clear on a lot of things. It's signed with the Dominion of Canada, by the way. Transfer, surrender, and relinquish forever. Yeah, that's down at the part where the signatories were the First Nations chiefs saying, we're taking these pieces of land through the treaty, and we're forever relinquishing all title to every other bit of land. And that includes all that crown land and traditional land and all that, guys. So if we want to go with the treaties, don't worry. If we want to keep up to the text of the treaties, again, read it. It talks about how many farm implements we have to give, a certain amount of horses. You know, they're outdated documents. A lot of the things that govern First Nations, the bands and so on, are under the Indian Act. And even the name of that act alone tells you how outdated and outmoded and old that act is. But that's legislation. Legislation is mutable. It can be changed, and it will be changed. The Indian Act is a vile document in reality, and there's nothing entrenched with it. So people talk again about, oh, it's constitutionally entrenched for treaty rights and everything in First Nations. What it talks about is consultation. There's an obligation for consultation on things with Indigenous people. That's fair enough, but don't mistake that for consent. That's what a lot of people keep reading into it, and again, that's bunk. We consult, you do it in good faith, you bring in, you communicate, you embrace as much as you can. But if in the end the leadership still says, no, well, that's a shame. We consulted, we did our part, and we're still going to move on with things. That's part of what's been hindering and holding up infrastructure development and pipelines too. These ridiculous interpretations claiming we need consent of the nearest Indigenous person to anything we do, and we do not need that. We should consult, absolutely. And in fact, constitutionally, we are obliged to. And we should do it in good faith, just morally. They're citizens. And it's important. And part of that consultation, it should be a positive thing. We can point out, because, I mean, look at the state of affairs for most Indigenous people living on reserves in Canada. It's horrific. Here's some video clips from my own videos I did in the last couple of months. I gave video tours of a couple of reserves in southern Alberta. They're living in appalling conditions. The housing's falling apart. There's wild dogs. The people are poor. Suicide rates are high. Addiction rates are through the roof. As I pointed out on my video, and this came out and it just didn't make enough news because, again, people don't want to admit the system's broken. But Indigenous men in Alberta die on average 19 years younger than everybody else. Think about that. 19 years younger, they're dying. How much more badly do we need this system to fail Indigenous people before admitting we have to change it? It's outrageous. And if we reach to enough Indigenous people living in the squalor they are on those reserves, I think they're ready to change the system. It doesn't mean getting rid of the treaties. We're just talking about changing the damn system, because it's not working at all for them. And independence gives a route to break out of the status quo. You got to remember, who's the status quo serving? Who's getting rich off of the system as it sits today? It's similar, but not nearly as badly, in Canada in general, as we see the gross domestic product per person over the last decade plummeting when compared to the rest of the world. We're getting poorer all over the place. Canada economically now compares to Mississippi in the United States. But some of the difference is, at least you could buy a house for $80,000 in Mississippi. In Canada, we're living as poor as the people of Mississippi, but our cost of living is through the roof on top of that. Likewise on the reserves. These things are failing. They're doing terribly. So let's examine how we can make it better. Independence can break them out of that rut. And we need to bring Indigenous people on board. Make the case respectfully. You know, people, of course, they always start screaming, racist, racist. What are you talking about? I'm criticizing a system, not a people. If you really dislike Indigenous people, if you really are some kind of racist, you know the worst thing you could do? Keep the current system. But there are some bureaucrats, some lawyers, some chiefs who have a very strong vested interest in keeping this system just the way it is. And I hate to say it, but unfortunately, a lot of reserves deal with a lot of corruption problems with their leadership. I mean, you see the nasty housing I showed and everything else. There'll always be a few nice big houses on, or sometimes even off the reserve, held by the chief and some particular family members. Somehow they got a lot of money. I think there's a lot of interest on the people on the ground to want to change some of the things that are going on the reserve system. So how do we break loose from this? Again, independence is the path towards it. But this, false treaty right, we got to get beyond that. Quit indulging that. Quit pretending. Every single Indigenous citizen of Western Canada has the right to vote in a referendum, just like any other citizen. We're equal. We must be equal. It's this perception of inequity what has divided the population so badly. Racial division. What a horrible thing. What do you expect? We're sequestering entire groups of people based on race on a document called the Indian Act. And people think it's going to work. But so, you know, we saw that people showing it, a band up north, Sturgeon Lake. And then I assure you, that's up by Valley View, northern Alberta. That reserve, I don't know currently, but I know many years ago it had some very serious management problems, to say the least. They put out a letter saying, you know, don't you dare, Premier Smith, you pull away that referenda legislation. You're not allowed to do that. That interferes with our treaty rights. And everybody was opponents to independence were holding it up. See what? It's a letter from a chief who really likes the status quo. Good for him. And a few other Indigenous leaders who like the status quo. Good for them. But where in those letters does it say that it infringes on a treaty right? Show me which treaty right then. Which part of any treaty says we can't hold a referendum on anything? Never mind independence. It's not there, guys. That treaty right isn't there. There's a lot of perceived treaty rights out there that just don't exist. And it doesn't mean we discard the entire treaties. Again, as I said, you respect that land, of course. It's not going away. Some of the other things. I mean, one of the irony of the treaties, you want to know one of the things that is entrenched in the treaties is the government providing education, which led to the residential schools. So following the treaty rights to a T isn't necessarily always serving the people that they're applied to well. We don't really want to serve, take those treaties literally as they are. But you see, again, interpreting to the point of these rights that don't exist, that's incorrect as well. So when you're having discussions with people on independence and where we're going to go, look, there's a positive future for Indigenous people in the West. They can be more empowered. I envision an independent West having a very, very decentralized government. Look up Switzerland. They have 26 cantons. They're like provincial units in one small little country. It's much smaller than Alberta. And some of them only have fewer than 20,000 people in it. I mean, they're very independent. They have a great deal of autonomy within those cantons. You don't hear about the federal government in Switzerland because it's tiny. An independent West can decentralize. It can empower the reserves. It can make them truly closer to more sovereign than what they are right now. And that's another one of the misnomers when people talk about their sovereign nations. No, they aren't. They're people on racial enclaves signed into them by treaties. They're nothing at all like sovereign nations, actually, unfortunately. They're strange governance units that aren't serving the people very well at all. And with a new system that allows more authority, allows more power to these individual, areas, reserves, and regions, we can better reflect the different needs of those different areas. Right now, they're all just locked into this rut, and it's got to break. It's got to stop. So no, it's not ending the treaties. It's not violating the treaties. We can stay within the treaties, but we can change the system, and it's going to be better for everybody. But that's the case we have to make, right? We're making the negative case quite well. It's quite easy. There's a lot of reasons why independence, why Canada hasn't served the West well, and it won't. It can't. The system's broken. Canada is broken. But when you're trying to convince somebody to make the check mark on a referendum vote, of course, you've got to give them the positives. You've got to tell them why it's going to be better, though, or are we just going to be a smaller unit of the same thing? Well, one of the areas where it could be a lot better is we can get fresh eyes on an old system that is serving a lot of citizens, Indigenous citizens, very, very badly. And we can reevaluate that and update it and make it better for them. Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, citizens, all doing better. I'll finish with my usual plug, though. I got to point it out. I've got it all in the book, the Sovereigntist Handbook. You want to make the case for independence, want to learn how to campaign, all of those things. This is the guidebook. It's not the why, it's the how. It's available on Amazon. Again, these video series, I'll cover a lot of it through these. You don't have to buy the book, but if you get the chance, pick up a copy. It's been doing really well and getting great reviews. Next video, I'm going to talk about pensions. It's another area where people are pretty concerned, and rightly so. They worry about those coming with independence. And don't worry, like with the Indigenous thing, we'll do better after independence, not worse.